Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? It is day 30 of RPG A Day 2018, and our question or prompt for today is share something you learned about playing your character. And it's funny, I had to read that question a bunch of times because where you put the imaginary comma or the inflection you give it will change what the heck that sentence means. What have I learned about playing my character? Well, I learned I should roll the dice and make them do stuff. But anyhow. I'll be honest, I'm not going to share something I learned about while playing my character. I'm going to share some things. But, you ought to be used to that by now. This is my channel. It's a channel about me. I'll do what I want. But I won't take forever. I promise, really. I say it a lot that the character that shows up may be different than the character that you first envisioned in your head. Character just definitely tends to show up over time. Sure, I can start with a concept about what I think this guy is going to be like, or I might play a bunch of games that I actually really like. These prompts that a lot of these games have, where it kind of has you choose, what the motivations or flaws or vows or bonds or all these little ingredients of personality to kind of give you this template. Or give you some more to inform you more of what your character is actually going to be like. I like all that kind of stuff, but despite the fact that you can start with all that sort of stuff, those really don't give birth to a character. At the very best, they're kind of a really attentive midwife. But it's been my experience, and I've learned this over and over and over again, that the character that shows up just kind of shows up. And it takes a while for everything to gel, and sometimes it can be somebody that's very different than the character that you first imagined that they were going to be. But the character definitely tends to, in my experience, tends to kind of come through, whether we want them to or not. That's who shows up, which is really kind of cool. The other thing that's really related to that I've learned is if I fight that, if I start to not trust my instincts about who this character is. And I'm not talking about my guy syndrome, where I'm just going to be petulant and moody and oppositional, and this is what my guy's going to do. But if I don't pay attention to that instinct, pay attention to that character that's coming out, I tend not to enjoy the session. If I'm kind of modulating how I act, how he thinks, all these sort of things, because I think it might upset the other players, I start wondering, like, is it time for the session to be over? Because I'm really just not enjoying it. So I've learned over and over again that when I fight that emergent character, things don't go so well for me. I don't enjoy the experience. So I've learned to kind of just acquiesce to the fact that this person is going to show up and we're going to find out who they are. Actually, what's really interesting is tomorrow we're going to have our second session of Behold the Tribunal. And it was a video that I originally posted on my channel, and I call it the RPG Venn diagram, but it's Scott of the Disemboweled channel actually came up with the concept, and he invited Sam from Chalice and Chains and Jason from Dark Age of Roleplay Games and myself to kind of make this little Venn diagram, and he decided we're going to call this Behold the Tribunal, and it actually has its own YouTube channel now, and I'm not sure who's going to host the next one. I think we're going to rotate, but then the video ends up getting posted as well on this other channel. But we're going to talk about immersion. And the whole purpose of this group, this roundtable, and I guess we're going to have some guests from time to time. We might even have a guest tomorrow. No promises. Is to kind of argue a little bit, because we definitely disagree on some of these topics, and we find out where we have common ground and where we don't have common ground. It's great, because despite the fact that it's supposed to be based on a lot of polemics and headbutting, we actually we're a bunch of nice guys, so we're pretty nice to each other, even though sometimes we want to throttle each other. But Scott's premise for this one is immersion schmersion. The idea that part of his thesis is, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that like in-character immersion is impossible because you always kind of play yourself. And while I disagree with Scott, I understand there's this kernel of truth in what he's saying, because it's been my experience that, and let's ignore all the times that like I've brought an avatar of myself. I'm going to play myself in a different setting with or without cool powers. Ignore all that. But all the other characters I've brought to the table, very often they have some kind of aspect of my own personality in them, some kind of facet. And this isn't really surprising because human beings are human beings. There's a lot of overlap in terms of like what our personalities are, what the various things that make us human are. And just because my characters are artificial, pretend humans, doesn't make them any less human in terms of like the personality and what have you. So that's not really surprising, but there's often times where I find out that I'm kind of learning about myself as I'm exploring different facets of my personality. And you know, RPGs are great. They're really unique because something can't be really unique. It's either unique or it isn't. They're unique because part of what they do is they allow us to experience things that we never would have otherwise. Experience different scenarios, events, even different perspectives. You know, we can step into the shoes of somebody that's radically different than we are, and experience life, you know, through their eyes. Do things that we would never do, but this character would do. That's really, really interesting. But also, you know, sometimes we have these characters that aren't too different than us. At least they're not too different than us in some areas, or maybe there's some way that we would like to be, some way that we aspire to, or they're kind of a exaggeration of how we are in a way that we really don't want to be. We're just kind of exploring that part of our personality. And now that I droned on for almost 6 minutes, I'll give you an example. In real life, I tend to be rather risk averse. This is something I continue to work on because it's something about myself I don't like, because I miss out on opportunities and all that kind of good stuff. But a lot of my recent characters, certainly not all of them, have been less risk averse. Some of them are actually, you know, very risk averse, but they've been willing to take more chances, stand up for what they believe in, you know, that sort of thing. And you could have a lot of fun playing armchair psychiatrist with me at this point in terms of why I'm doing all this kind of stuff. But I'm more interested in how similarly constructed characters, you know, ones that are almost identical in this particular area, how they act different and feel different depending on the game system itself. And I made a video, maybe like back in June, talking about this. The idea that I can play something that's more pulp heroic, like Hollow Earth Expedition with somebody like Joe Decker, or Mythos Mithras with Zachary Bishop. And in certain ways, the characters aren't all that different, but the consequences in the systems are different. And you know, as such, the characters start to feel different because how they approach things, how they view consequences, changes because the consequences themselves really change. And of course, there's this other layer on top of that, that you know, either of these guys can behave in ways and stand up for things and take risks despite what those consequences are. You know, meaningful choices, that sort of thing. And one of the things I've noticed as I've looked into that, looked into how all that feels, is I've watched, you know, how this relates to my own perception of things like risk, like consequences, like the things that I value, my priorities in life, you know, all that sort of thing. So that's a pretty interesting thing. As it, you know, I feel it often when you play a character, you start to learn things about yourself, whether you wanted to or not. And so, you know, that's worth the price of buying a few dice and spending a few hours of your time stepping into a different world, stepping into a different set of shoes, different person. And you know, while you're learning about that character, while you're learning about that system, while you're learning about all that stuff, very often you can learn something about yourself as well. And I find that pretty cool. Talk to you tomorrow, kids.